Welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. We have a fantastic panel and a really compelling and challenging topic about skills and skills for in-demand careers. We'll do a short round of introductions and get into the discussion. My name is Chris Kibarian. I'm CEO of a company called Lightcast, and we provide labor market data and analytics. We are a combination of both Burning Glass and MZ, which are companies you may be familiar with. I'd like to introduce the gentleman to my right, Mr. Hansen.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Michael Hansen, I'm the CEO of Cengage, and we fundamentally do two things. We provide learning materials, mostly digital, to students, and we provide learning directly in our Cengage work business.
Hi, I'm Lina Bankert, Managing Director and Partner with the Boston Consulting Group. I think I might be the one of these things that's not like the other on the stage, but I spend all my time in the public sector domain working at the intersection of K-12, higher education, and workforce, and we'll be delighted to provide some of the big picture context around the very important issues that we'll be discussing today.
Hello, I'm Sanjay Srivastava. I'm the founder and CEO of Vocareum. We provide hands-on labs for digital skills like data science, machine learning, cybersecurity to about 2.5 million learners.
Hi, everybody. Adanna Ukah from Chegg Skills. Many people know Chegg for our work serving college students worldwide. Our skills team has been in some form for 10 years, and we are providing digital and durable skills for adult learners and workers. Great to be here.
Hi, I'm Tom Reilly. I'm Chief Product Officer of CompTIA. We're a global nonprofit providing technology, cybersecurity skills training.
Terrific. Thank you, everyone. To put this conversation in context, we thought it would be helpful to just lay out a couple key data points. Right now in this country there are about 10 million openings, job openings, and there are about 5 million people looking for those jobs, which leaves 5 million unfilled positions, 5 million missing workers in the labor force. And when you separate that, those 5 million people out, about 3 million are entry level, right, in hospitality or in agriculture, which leaves about 2.5 million unfilled jobs that are in high demand, that require high skill, a high degree of education, a high degree of skilling. And that's the topic we're attempting to tackle today. And so with that as context, I wanted to lodge the first question to Lina to give some macro perspective. Lina works with a number of large, both public and private institutions, focusing on jobs of the future, education. And so the first question I have for you is, do you think the labor shortages that we're facing are persistent? Are they transitory? Is the demographic drought that we're facing something that we're going to have to live with and deal with, or otherwise?
In a word, yes. The data really speaks for itself. When you look at declining birth rates over the past several decades, we haven't even reached a trough yet, and the ripple effects last for decades after that. So from a numbers standpoint, just at that top line, we're going to see these implications continue to cascade through for quite a number of decades to come. At the same time, we also know that the war for talent is heating up. I had a couple of slides ready as a very good consultant that I'm not able to share, but I did write down a few important points. Unemployment is at an all-time low. So 3.5%, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics at last look. For African Americans, it's 5%. That's a record low since 1972. Just about every organization, every region, every state across the country that we're working in is seeing gaps, shortages, and pressures. We, in particular, are dealing with a lot of supply-demand mismatches in different regions where you're seeing the education system producing talent, producing young people who may not necessarily be equipped to address or fill the skill needs or the employer needs in those particular regions. Sometimes they are pretty foundational gaps. Sometimes they are based on a particular skill mismatch. Everyone's been talking about nursing shortages as an example. The data really speaks to that. It is real, right? When you look at the number of RNs or PAs that our schools are producing, and then what hospitals and providers are actually looking for. I don't see any of this changing in the near term. And at the same time, there are increasing pressures for people to move on and to seek new jobs and new employment. There are staggering numbers of people who are saying that they're ready to find their next job. There are even more who are saying that they need new skills to be able to be successful in their companies, whether or not they stay or move on in other places. And we see that about 50% of workers will need to be upskilled in the near term.
And I'm glad you raised the point about healthcare because, you know, a couple weeks ago we were talking with one of our larger healthcare customers who said, look, we need to find people in high school to pursue the nursing profession. We need solutions to help bring young people into the labor market supply chain because mid-career professionals or, you know, again, getting a nurse to switch from one state to another or one hospital system to another just isn't working anymore. And they're paying $50,000 relocation bonuses, $20,000 signing bonuses, and at a certain point, these hiring managers are, you know, at their wits' end because the people aren't there, which in some respects kind of brings us to our next question, which is, you know, is this fundamentally a supply issue? Is it a skill issue? And, you know, maybe Thomas, we can, you know, take this question because I think that was one of the ones that you raised.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chris. I think at CompTIA, based on the research we do over the last 30 years, training over 500,000 people a year in technology, our research shows when you use the words capability, crisis, and skills gap, I mean, to coin a recent term, it's kind of victim blaming. You know, the big three of academia, government, and private sector aren't doing a great job of helping potential candidates overcome a confidence gap. Our research shows in technology over 55, almost 60% of people feel a confidence gap in pursuing a technology job. Why is that? Well, one example is I went out onto Indeed. An entry-level tech support job typically requires a college degree, 3 years of experience, and detailed knowledge of systems like Zendesk and HubSpot, right? So how does someone get their foot on the first rung of the career ladder when the ladder is 20 feet in the air? The other thing going on in big tech, and I'll pick on them for a minute, is the over-speccing of job roles. One of the things we did in partnership with Lightcast is create a job posting optimizer to help take those job roles down to where they should be and eliminate bias. Optimize.comptia.org, in case you're interested. Because really in big tech and in a lot of the private sector, large consulting companies, it's just people poaching from each other. The person you want is working somewhere else, and the people who are really only winning are retained search firms. And so in our mind, we want to get more people into those feeder roles so that more people have an opportunity to move up and create more career mobility.
I mean, just a show of hands, how many people think we're in a talent-abundant environment? Well, there's 2 hands. All right. At the end of the day, you know, for how many years of modern history have we lived in an environment where talent was abundant? The challenge was jobs, creating enough jobs. And if we're in a period of time when there are more jobs than people to fill them, and these gaps are sustained, persistent, and deeply rooted and require, you know, additional solutions, does that change people from a cost center to an asset class? How do you treat an asset class? You nurture it, you train it, you enable it, you value it. I'm just curious what you all think about is there a shift happening among employers that the old methodology for treating people like a cost, is it changing? Is it truly changing in any way?
So, as far as I can see, I mean, it is changing and it has to change. I mean, right? I mean, we all, hear about right now how ChatGPT went from whatever million users in a few days, and which means now, people have to train everyone now for your development departments, your sales, and your marketing to say how to be more productive using your large language models. And before that, we saw the organizations were being asked to become a data savvy, over a period of a few years. Or something which we are very deeply involved in is the cloud computing. You have to have the entire organization now move to become, literate on public cloud. There is no way anecdotally it's there. You can see the data which is there, but there's a huge need that you can't say my entire IT department I'm going to, bring in a new one which is cloud literate, right? You have to train it, and I think the data in terms of how well, the enterprise businesses of an organization like Udemy and Coursera, you can kind of see in their public financial reports. So the shift, we are seeing that, and accelerating at a pace, that definitely completely unforeseen and forced by the, the pace at which at least the technology is changing.
I mean, it was actually a BCG colleague of yours that said enterprises typically spend 5 times more on talent acquisition than they do on talent development. And first of all, does that comport? Does that align with what you observe and what you know?
It might, but I would say, Chris, that in today's day and age, you have to do both and not an either or. So one really important piece to me that has been historically missing in the talent acquisition part of the talent life cycle has been bringing in historically marginalized populations into the talent pool. You can think about Americans with disabilities, veterans, people who have been impacted by the justice system. Just yesterday, we published a piece on fair chance hiring, which is pushing employers to think about bringing in people with criminal records into the talent pipeline. And when we first got to know the numbers, I was just absolutely staggered that 1 in 2 or 3 American working adults have a criminal record, and there's 19 million convicted felons in the US. Think about the implications or the barriers that these individuals face to access employment, either as a frontline worker or in many cases, these are talented and skilled people who can easily re-engage or even be upskilled in other ways. So I think from that standpoint, organizations have to widen the talent pipeline and think about how they're bringing in new populations. And then they also have to think about upskilling and reskilling and doing so at scale. And in a way that really ties their learning and development goals to whatever transformation or strategy the organizations have at that top line level.
Well, speaking of skilling at scale, Adanna, maybe you can enlighten us or give us some perspective on what is the skilling challenge? How should we be thinking about it?
Sure, I'll answer that. I do want to make a point to add on to what Lina just said. We're underspending on talent development, and there's this 80-20 challenge that we see where even when you think about talent development spend, 80% of the spend is going to the 20% of the people at the top. And so it really does say, no matter what that person at the middle or lower rungs of the business looks like, we're totally underspending on them. To answer your question, Chris, when you think about upskilling and reskilling, I want us to think about who we're actually serving here. We often talk about mid-career professionals. What that looks like is not what this room looks like, and so often mid-career is someone who is a retail associate or a bank teller or a customer service agent, or we talk about skilling, they are maybe a medical assistant. This is what mid-career really looks like, and in order to get to filling the skills gap, we actually need to serve those people. Really agree with the point about victim shaming when we talk about the people who we're serving, and when we think about GSV, we have providers here, we have learning leads here, we have employers here, And it really is on us to lead the innovation when it comes to skilling. I can give an example. I'm currently at Chegg Skills, but before that, I was a buyer for skilling products. And what was really astonishing was that there were so many groups that would come to me and say, we have a product or a strategy that solves the skilling gap. And 9 times out of 10, those were products that were focused on the wrong person, right? They were focused on a corporate learner. They were focused on someone who was degreed. When we say that we're doing skilling, and we're actually not, like, it's doing a disservice to the work that we should be doing. I joined Chegg in part because I saw that there are different models and ways of thinking about the skills gap that are not just program related. So we know there's a gap in cybersecurity. We know there's a gap in AI, data science, et cetera. It's not just those programs. Anyone can build a program, but it's also the container that we're building. And I think innovation really needs to come in understanding those learners. So how do they work? How do they learn? How do they live? We've seen incredible results in getting 2x the number of graduation rates by building programs that really speak to that learner. And innovation doesn't have to be, AI or ChatGPT. Sometimes it's just understanding the learner and building the right container for that learner. So that's my take.
Yeah, let me chime in on this because I very much agree with what you're saying, but I also want to pull back a little bit and actually start with disagreeing with you, Chris, on something. You said, now is the time to treat people like assets as opposed to a cost center. Well, I've been the CEO of Cengage for almost 12 years. I've been a CEO for 20 years. I've yet to meet a CEO who doesn't start his public speech by saying, my people are my biggest assets. Right? They all say that, right? But then they don't treat them like that. And that's a problem. So I would say that has not changed. The people are the key asset of any organization. But now, if you don't treat them well, you pay the price. So fundamentally, the outcome is the same. I think at the highest level, what we're dealing with, though, the dilemma that we're dealing with, that skills gap today, is the fact that, number one, all education is local. So you got to find local ways to actually train people through the institutions that we have, and ideally, do that in a way that meets the local demand of the employers. However, if we do it one local community college at a time, it's going to take decades to close the skills gap. So we need the scaling ability, and this is where I think private enterprises like a Chegg, like a Cengage, and others can come in. But we need a public and private partnership, and I think the challenge for the education system in the United States is it works magnificently, just not for the students and the employers. It works for the system. It produces an amazing amount of degrees, it produces an amazing amount of high school diplomas, but it doesn't work for the constituents it should be working for. And that's what really the discussion we need to have about how do we connect the workspace more effectively with the education system.
And what are some examples where you're seeing the public-private partnership work well, where organizations and institutions really are making the connection between education and gainful work and fulfilling careers?
Well, we're seeing it in parts. We're not seeing it enough, but we're seeing it, for instance, our Ed2Go business partners with local colleges, community colleges or four-year colleges, and we identify what are the jobs that are in the community in high demand. And very often those are, as you said before, they are healthcare jobs, right? So we work with those colleges to develop courses that fill those jobs. That works, but it needs to work at scale. It needs to work in thousands of community colleges around the country, not just in this one where there's an enlightened principal who says, like, president of a community college who says, we'll do this. So that's our challenge, to make it work at scale. Examples are plenty, but the examples don't fill 5 million jobs.
Tom, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I picked on big tech earlier, but I will point out one of our public-private, if you call CompTIA public, because we're a nonprofit, partnership with Amazon, where we're taking warehouse workers, most of them are non-degreed, and creating feeder training into feeder help desk roles. And what that does, and to us at CompTIA, through our research, that's the biggest problem. We're not creating those pipelines in. We're creating false walls for people to come in. You've got to have a college degree. You've got to have experience. Through the partnership we've done the last 4 years with Amazon, we take a warehouse worker, we meet them where they are, and within 10 weeks we can have them job ready for a help desk role, combining both tech skills and durable skills. What that does at Amazon is that now there can be a network admin who's been upskilling into one of those unicorn cybersecurity roles. He can move forward, or she can move forward into that cybersecurity role. The network admin is moved forward. The help desk person is moving forward into the network admin role, and another person, feeder, can come in. And that creates career mobility and career satisfaction for people. For the company, for the CEO, what it means is he hasn't paid a retained search firm $100,000 retainer fee for that person. And all that intellectual property stays within the company. That seems to make sense. And we've seen that work with Amazon, and we want to partner with more organizations to do that.
Well, I wanted to follow up back with Adanna and Sanjay on the fact that humans are analog, and a lot of the tools we use are digital, right? And in some respects, like, what is the secret sauce, or what's the way we utilize technology to compel people to do things they might not normally do, like study for a cybersecurity degree, or again, overcome the phobia or fear that they're not technical or they're not quantitative when they actually are?
Go ahead.
Sure. So when we think about the tools, we can all name, personalized learning, adaptive learning. There are many ways to engage and motivate people, to show them examples of how they could be successful. In many ways, I see just showing a learner someone who looks like them, someone with their background, someone who was in retail for 10 years before making a career switch is extremely effective. So it's not always technological tools. It's also storytelling and making sure we're getting the right stories to the right people, and we're representing those pathways in a way that feels hopeful.
Yeah, and from our perspective, I would say, apart from any particular technology, what we at least see when it's effective is when you meet, especially in terms of mid-career learners, when you meet to their time and space, which means, like for example, on a Saturday or Sunday, if I see Vocareums like dashboards, there are a lot of people, mid-career professionals, who are actually taking boot camps to upskill themselves, or it's being done either they are doing self-paced, and it needs to be relevant. So the relevance part is at least to something, which is a big deal, because if you're a mid-career professional, the gap between what you're learning and when you're going to be able to utilize it, it needs to be pretty short. If you're going to be spending a lot of time and money, so that's, at least for us, I think what we focus on is meet the learner in their time and space, and shorten the gap between when they learn a skill and when they can deploy the skill.
Well, and I'd like to pivot to Lina and Michael for a second, just because oftentimes to your point, there's often like a ping pong. Everyone needs skills, but we all need higher education, and there's this kind of back and forth between the value and merits of a traditional liberal arts education, where you think broadly, you think analytically, versus this very tactile, transactional skills acquisition to be able to be commercially viable. How should we be thinking about that balance?
So I want to come to that question, if I may. One caution I would have, even as we lift up some of these really incredible tools, upskilling strategies that individual companies and entities and partnerships might offer, we also have to think at the macro level, because so often we are optimizing for what's in front of us and not thinking about the ripple effects on a region or on a state. So when you asked the question, Chris, early on about is anyone not seeing talent shortages, one of the states we worked in recently would say welders. Because everyone was producing welders, they perceived that everybody needed welders, and so every school, every college, community college, was setting up welding programs. And you know what? There's actually an oversupply now, and they're trying to pull that back. So I wanted to make that bigger picture point. Somebody needs to be looking at a more macro level and helping to sort through how programs are being distributed across institutions. But I think to your question about the liberal arts, there's such an important role that the liberal arts can play, and we have a lot of these conversations with some of the smaller private institutions in particular that are feeling such a squeeze right now as young people turn to other alternatives or other lower cost alternatives to education. And we tell them you have to have a North Star or a vision for the institution that does connect to the jobs of the future. So you have to project out multiple years and think about how the liberal arts might help your young people get skilled to achieve those jobs of the future. And so might you scale back a major in philosophy as an example? Maybe. Should you still offer philosophy? Absolutely, because it's going to teach those critical thinking and more diverse problem-solving skills that young people really need.
Yeah, and I just want to build on that. I think for the longest period of time in the United States, there was one way to the middle class. Go to college, and then you will end up in the middle class and you make up a good income. Everybody else was left out, okay? Now, let's do the numbers. 40% of students, high school students, attempt college. 40% of those drop out, right? So now we're at 26%, right? So what happens to the others? So my plea is we gotta provide different avenues to the middle class. There's not only one way. And I really feel we're doing the country a disservice if we have this philosophical discussion about liberal arts versus an avenue to the middle class. To Lina's point, there are different ways to teach the skills that liberal arts teaches you. The only reason that we said there is one way, because it was so damn convenient for the people that marched that one way, right? The institutions, the faculty, it was very convenient. Everyone, who says it takes 4 years? I have 3 sons. They're all now allegedly in college. You know, I don't know why it's 4 years, and I have no idea why it costs, whatever it costs, a boatload of money, right? I have no idea why that is. So it's magical, apparently. So I think this is about breaking up the system, providing different avenues, and I think online is here to stay and will provide different avenues to people. And it's not a religious debate. It is a debate about practicalities.
I agree completely with Michael. I think we all believe and know in the value of a college degree, but if only 40% of people are actually doing that degree and it takes many others 6 years or they stop halfway through, we do need to invest in the other side of the coin. I would also say, you know, this topic is about the skills gap, and I don't think we're going to solve the skills gap with degrees. When we think about all of the areas in cyber, AI, they're all moving so quickly that skills are getting stale really fast, and it does take all of us investing in the skill side of the house to actually close the gap. I think that's one of the biggest unlocks, especially we think about employers and who we're actually hiring.
Yeah, I would say too, I think from my perspective, the focus on STEM has had a really bad effect. What it's said in the last several years is that you have to be good in math and science to get a job in the new economy. I'd like to say that I'm an example of a liberal arts student from a public university, and Yukon Huskies. And, you know, I think I'm living proof you don't need that. And I would also say that in the future, things like philosophy and ethics as we move into AI may be more important than ever. And, you know, so I think it is a combination of technical and other skills that are going to lead us forward.
I agree. It makes me wonder if we are conflating a bit the topics that are important or the skills that are important and the container they should be delivered in. Philosophy is absolutely important. Should it take 4 years on campus to get that degree? Probably not, and that's what we're all being asked to do.
You know, Michael, last week you had mentioned that you've been coming to this event for a long time, right? And you know, every year...
There was never 7,000 people, though.
Well, yeah. And every year there's this promise of innovation. There's this promise of what we all can do. And what's your sense of where we are and what we've done right and what we've done not so right?
Well, at the risk of dating myself, yes, I have been coming here for a long time. And every year there seems to be something that changes the world tomorrow, and every problem is solved. For those who are old enough, remember the MOOCs. They put all colleges out of business, right? That was 10 years ago. And then it was adaptive learning. That kills everybody else, right? That was 7 years ago, and so on. So this year, it's AI, right? Obviously, we have to talk about AI. I'm surprised that we're not talking about it. And the other things is skills, right? And it's going to change the world tomorrow, right? What I would say from my perspective, let's just have patience. America is an unbelievably innovative country, and we love to find solutions very quickly, and we're very good at it. And then companies spring up, and then money floats around in the halls here, right, to fund people with good ideas. And that is terrific. But we have to realize that building a scalable solution to this problem is going to take time, and we need to learn how to stick with it. And this skills problem is not going to be solved in a year, not in 2 years. We're lucky if we're going to solve it in 5 years. And we have to have private-public partnerships. And that's where it's about the practicality of working together in a way on a focus of do we deliver value to students and do we deliver value to employers? And let's hold ourselves accountable. That's what I would love to see, and I would love to see a conference that's purely dedicated to implementation rather than just an idea.
What inhibits public-private partnership? What is the barrier? What is the gap? What do you think is missing?
Well, I mean, in terms of sort of an example, successful example, and since we are on Amazon bandwagon, so we have a partnership with AWS Academy, which was just mind-blowing to watch how they, we just provide a small piece, the labs portion, but they put this program together with the curriculum, with all the investment, and it blew up to 6, and it's there on their website. I think they list something like 6,000 or more universities in a matter of just trying to make sure I don't disclose anything which is not publicly disclosed. But in a very short time, they were cloud computing was now a curriculum in thousands of universities, and we have all this data to say all the students, not only they're getting degrees, but potentially they're getting a cloud certificate, and which leads to, very, very meaningful sort of change in their economic circumstances. So we have seen that, and I think, so there are solutions being deployed, at least in my mind, at scale. This is one of the examples. Very recently, we were talking to a professor at one of the universities and said, I taught data breaks in my class, graduate students, and when these people went to the employers, and employers really liked that on day one, these guys can actually work with a real tool, not only knew the concept, but they can work with the real tool. So we are doing a pilot to say how can we, but it took me a long time to set up and all that. How do we do it at scale? So in that case, again, we need partnership with these technology providers, and on the other side, universities and all the learning platforms like Udacity, Coursera, and Udemy, and all them. And you can reach millions of learners with a relevant skill almost overnight. And we have built this infrastructure at least in the last 10 years, to be able to do that at scale. So I'm pretty excited about where we are in terms of implementing, going back to Michael's point about implementing solutions.
And Thomas, in terms of, you're probably at the cusp or at the center of many public-private partnerships. I mean, what is it that's missing? Because it's happening with tech giants, but is it happening pervasively throughout multiple industries?
Again, we see mainly the tech sector. I think like a lot of things, it starts with the success with the large companies. And a lot of the smaller to mid-sized companies look to those companies as examples. And we're seeing more examples of that at mid-sized levels. We see good examples in academia as well. We've been partnered really tightly with WGU for years. A great example of, higher ed that is 100% competency-based and is 100% focused on getting those WG graduates a job. So I think in general it starts with the large organizations showing success and those smaller to mid-sized companies seeing that success and grabbing a hold of it. But the whole change is, as I've said, really starts with us eliminating those barriers. There are certain jobs, like at my company, I really think I want my CFO to have like a CPA. That's probably pretty important that we pay our taxes and so forth. But for most jobs at our company now, we've eliminated the 4-year degree because we're trying to walk the walk, and we're trying to help more people get that first rung on the ladder. So I think it starts with eliminating those barriers. If companies start eliminating those barriers, it opens up the pool, and more of these partnerships can take place.
I would add to that, we do need to undo the barriers. I don't want to give big tech too much credit because they are leading the way in many ways when we talk about upskilling, but we need to ask you need to have something to skill up into. And so many of these companies are doing skilling as CSR or external. They've eliminated skills requirements internally, but when we think about how many people are actually getting hired from all of these great skilling programs, it's lower than it should be, and that's part of the unlock. So actually looking internally and moving outwards and saying, you know, our core hiring strategy needs to focus on people who look different than what we typically see.
I would say this might sound very basic, but 3 things that we see over and over again as success factors in public-private partnerships. One is a common vision, right? Where it's more than just a big picture, super high-level idea, but rather the specific goals, the tangible metrics and measures that everyone can agree to orient to. Second, trust and transparency, and this is where data comes in. I think having data systems link up so that you can truly understand how a student, for example, progresses through a system and is impacted by whatever changes you're affecting, having that and then being able to have open and honest dialogue with all parties at the table, super critical. And then the third piece is effective implementation. A lot of times I say the innovation is in the implementation. I keep coming back to an example of a school district I worked with that was in a partnership with a number of private sector organizations that were funding a big technology effort. And they were very good at that change management component. They had a really exciting vision. They wanted to put devices in the hands of all the middle school students. And they got funding for the devices. They forgot about the infrastructure. So the kids couldn't even get online because the schools didn't have the bandwidth to support and sustain. They had to literally think about what they were going to do to rewire all their schools, and then they didn't invest in professional development. I mean, such a basic miss, right? But when you think about the sophistication of that implementation plan, not just the, again, high-level idea, but really drilling down to what is it going to take to make it happen, I think that's another critical ingredient.
And first of all, Lina, I'm really delighted that the 3-part answer at BCG is still alive. I used it when I was there many years ago.
A good consult.
It's fascinating why things come in 3 in the way. I think it's good. I didn't invent it, but I used it at BCG as well. But I totally fundamentally agree with what you're saying, and I would just add one thing to it, which I think is very important to your question about when do private-public partnerships work. Start with radical transparency. How do you make money? What makes you successful in your job? Start with that before you talk about any solution. Just say, like, what makes you as my partner successful and what makes me successful? I'm a for-profit business. I need to make money. So I need to lay out how I'm going to make money, what's going to benefit to me, and I got to be very transparent with the non-for-profit partner. And the non-for-profit partner has equal success metrics. Put them next to each other and start with that. Because when you understand where the other partner is coming from, it is much easier to avoid those pitfalls where people think they're doing the right thing, but all of a sudden it works against your partner's best interest.
Well, as you know, as someone who leads an organization that serves higher education, community college, private sector, nonprofits, chambers of commerce, economic development organizations, we see how they all can work together, and yet they don't often realize that each other exists. There's so many, private companies that are struggling and think it's all on them. They have to solve their own problem when we have extraordinary support infrastructure, educational resources. When Rivian found out that the local community college was graduating the people they needed to hire for their plan, it was like a breakthrough. We're in a truly, privileged environment to have such extraordinary educational institutions, extraordinary technology. the challenge, and hopefully in sessions like this, is to figure out and take the initiative to work together and look across that aisle and figure. And to your point, how do you make money? What's success for you? Guaranteed, there's a mutual benefit. And the funny thing is, because we serve all these customers in equal measure, we see how they can work, and we see sometimes when they work extraordinarily well. And hopefully, next year we'll enable more public-private partnerships. We will be we'll enable in some way a dynamic workforce that is using technology effectively, that is partnering effectively, that is skill relevant at all times, because skill velocity is changing so rapidly, in all sectors of the economy that, I think about our, the kids that are in college. My two kids were empty nesters now, and what future of work they're going to see. How I feel like telling them, don't get too set on a career, because it's going to change, and your ability to learn and be an autodidact and understand how to see the world through a dynamic lens is going to be really important. How do we teach that? I don't know, but that's our next panel, our next session. We're out of time, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.